The music was playing, people were laughing, the bride was glowing, and then everything stopped. A frail woman stood alone in the back of the wedding hall. Her hair was silver, her coat ears out of fashion. In her trembling hand was a sealed envelope. The groom saw her and froze. It was the woman who had raised him, fed him, held his hand when he cried, cheered the loudest at every graduation. But now, she wasn't even on the guest list. The bride whispered, "Who is that woman?" He said nothing. He couldn't, because if he opened his mouth, the truth would come out. He had told everyone. She was just a neighbor, just someone from his childhood. But he knew better, and inside that envelope she carried was the secret he had buried for years. What if everything you believed about your past was a lie? What if the person you pushed away was the only one who truly loved you? This story is not just about a wedding. It's about betrayal, regret, and a truth so painful, it might be too late to fix. If you've ever had someone walk out of your life, or wished you had said thank you before it was too late, then this story is for you. And if life gets busy, or your heart's not ready just yet, tap the subscribe button now so you won't miss the rest of this story, or the next one that might just touch your soul. Now ask yourself, would you recognize real love if it stood in front of you, broken and uninvited? Because sometimes the biggest mistake we make is not knowing we already had everything. Her name was Rose. She was a nurse. She lived alone in a quiet little house with yellow shutters and a white picket fence that she painted herself every spring. She didn't have much, but what she had she gave freely. One rainy night, the emergency room was packed. Screams, blood, panic, and in the middle of it all, a baby, left in a blanket, on the floor, soaked, shivering, abandoned. No one came back for him, not that night, not ever. For most people, he was just another lost child in the system, but to Rose, he was a miracle, a reason to wake up. She named him Ethan. He had the chubbiest cheeks, the bluest eyes, and a cry that could rattle the windows, which it did. Often. In the beginning, things were hard. Ethan wouldn't sleep through the night. Rose had dark circles under her eyes and coffee stains on every shirt she owned. But then, there were moments that made everything worth it. Like the time Ethan tried to help her make pancakes. He cracked 6 eggs. Directly onto the floor she slipped, landed in the mess, and they both laughed until they cried. Or the first time he called her mommy. He was 2, his voice tiny, his arms sticky with jelly. He ran to her, hugged her legs, and mumbled it like a secret. "Mommy." Rose didn't cry right away. She waited until he was asleep, then sat on the kitchen floor and wept into a dish towel. They had no money for fancy vacations, but they built rocket ships out of cardboard boxes. They danced in the living room to Elvis and Nat King Cole. They told stories under a blanket fort. Every Friday night, Ethan loved superhero comics. But when Rose couldn't afford new ones, she'd draw her own. She gave them names like Captain Cookie and Nurse Lightning. They weren't very good, but Ethan thought they were masterpieces. And every birthday, she gave him the same thing, a letter, 1 letter each year, handwritten, tied with a red ribbon. He kept them in a shoebox under his bed. Sometimes, when life felt unfair, Rose would stare at him and wonder how someone could throw away a child like him. And sometimes, when Ethan felt lonely at school, he'd run home, open the letters, and remember that someone had chosen him, not by chance, but on purpose. They weren't perfect, they argued. She grounded him once for sneaking cookies before dinner. He drew a mustache on her driver's license photo in revenge. But their love was real, not made of blood, but something deeper. Years passed like pages in a storybook, and in every chapter, Rose was there, at school plays, science, fairs, scraped knees, and late-night fevers. She always showed up, even when she had nothing left to give. And maybe that's what makes this story so hard to tell, because love like that doesn't come around often, and when it does, it should never be forgotten. Before we move on, if this part of the story touches you, hit the subscribe button so you can come back to it, or share it with someone who needs a reminder that love isn't always biological. Sometimes it's a choice. But the real question is, what happens when the child you raised chooses to forget you? Keep watching, because what Rose doesn't know is that everything she believed about Ethan is about to change. Ethan didn't grow up in a big house. He didn't have expensive toys or shiny bikes, but what he did have was a home filled with love, Every morning, Rose would wake him up with the smell of scrambled eggs and toast. She always cut his toast into the shape of little hearts. He pretended he was too old for that by the time he turned 10, but she kept doing it anyway. And secretly, he loved it. They had their rituals. Friday night movie marathons, with popcorn and root beer floats. Saturday mornings in the garden, Rose pulling weeds while Ethan chased butterflies. And every Sunday, they'd go to the flea market, looking for treasures. Ethan once found a rusty toy robot for 50 cents. He said it was magic. He made Rose carry it in her purse for a year. School wasn't always easy. Kids asked why he didn't look like his mom, why she was older, why his dad never showed up. Ethan used to come home with his shoulders slumped, but Rose had a way of fixing that. She'd kneel down, look him in the eyes, and say, "You're mine, not because I had to, but because I wanted to, and I'd choose you again, every single time." And somehow, that was enough. When Ethan was 12, he got the flu so bad, he couldn't eat for days. Rose didn't sleep. She sat by his bed, holding his hand, whispering lullabies from when he was a baby. Even when he told her to stop because he was too old for that, she just smiled and said, "Mothers don't follow age limits." He tried so hard to make her proud. He studied hard, brought home good grades, even wrote an essay about her for his 8th grade English class titled, "The Strongest Woman I Know." She framed it, hung it right above the kitchen table, next to the faded photo of them at the beach. Ethan missing his 2 front teeth, Rose, in a floppy sun hat, both covered in sand and laughing like children. Their bond wasn't perfect. He once accidentally dyed all her white laundry pink. She cried, then laughed, then made him wear one of the pink shirts to school as punishment. He never forgot, and neither did his classmates. But even as he grew older, taller, deeper voice, more independent, he still called out Mom when he had a nightmare, and Rose still came running. When he got accepted to college, they celebrated with hamburgers and root beer at the same diner they'd gone to since he was 6. Rose wore the same pearl earrings she had worn at his kindergarten graduation. Ethan joked they were her good luck charms. She said they were her proud mom earrings. That night, before he left for campus, she handed him a small envelope. Inside was his 18th letter. It simply read, "Wherever you go, my heart goes to. You'll never be alone." He hugged her tight, longer than usual. And for the first time, she felt him trembling. It was a goodbye. And somehow, she knew something was shifting, but because once Ethan stepped into his new life, he began leaving pieces of Rose behind. And the saddest part, she still kept the porch light on, just in case he came home. At first, Rose didn't think much of it. College kids get busy, she told herself. New classes, new friends, new freedom. It's normal. It's part of growing up. But still, something didn't feel right. The weekly phone calls became monthly, then barely at all. Text messages were short. "Can't talk. Class. Busy with group project. Everything's fine." But everything didn't feel fine. She tried not to nag. She didn't want to be that kind of mom. So instead, she mailed care packages, homemade cookies, his favorite socks, a comic book she found in a thrift store, and of course, his annual letter, number 19. He never mentioned it. Not a thank you. Not even a got it. She asked once, gently. "Did the box arrive?" Ethan replied 2 days later. "Yeah, thanks. Nothing else." One Sunday afternoon, Rose sat in his empty room. The bed was still made from the day he left. The superhero posters were curling at the corners. The shoebox with all the letters still under the bed, untouched. She ran her fingers across the red ribbons. One was loose. She retied it. Then the calls stopped completely. No updates, no holiday visits, not even for her birthday. She told her neighbor, "Maybe he's in love." The woman smiled kindly. "Or maybe he's just growing up." But late at night, Rose would sit by the phone and wonder. One day, she decided to surprise him. She baked a batch of oatmeal raisin cookies, packed them neatly, and drove 2 hours to his campus. The receptionist said he wasn't in his dorm anymore. He had moved off campus. No forwarding address. Rose left the cookies anyway. 3 weeks passed. No thank you. No mention. Nothing. Then, something strange happened. A letter came in the mail. No return address. Just a single line typed on plain paper. "He's not who you think he is." That was it. No name, no explanation, just those 8 words. She read it 5 times, then tucked it in the back of her drawer and tried to forget. But she couldn't. because, deep down, she knew something had changed. She noticed it in the way Ethan avoided eye contact when they finally timed, in how he spoke to polished, to rehearsed. He wasn't the boy who used to say, "I love you" with jelly on his face. He was distant, cold. Once she asked about his new apartment. He shrugged, said it was just a place, no pictures, no mention of her. She tried to laugh it off. Made a joke. "Well, at least tell me you're still eating vegetables." He smirked. "Mom, I'm not 10 anymore." That stung more than it should have. She laughed anyway. "That never stopped me from worrying." There was silence. And then, he said something she would never forget. "Maybe, you don't need to worry about me anymore." It hit her like a slap. She covered the silence with a cough, changed the subject, said goodbye with a smile. But that night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind looping over that one sentence. What did he mean? Was it just a phrase, or was he trying to say something more? And then she remembered the letter, folded, hidden, waiting. Maybe it wasn't just college stress. Maybe something, or someone, was pulling him away, because what Rose didn't know was that Ethan had already met someone, and that someone was about to change everything. It started with a phone call, not from Ethan, from a stranger, a deep voice, polite, but distant. "Mrs. Rose, my name is Thomas. I believe I'm Ethan's father." The world tilted. Rose gripped the kitchen counter to steady herself. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "I know this is sudden," he said, "but I've been trying to find him, and I think he deserves to know the truth." For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Her heart thudded in her chest like a drum. The line went quiet. Then Rose said softly, "Why now? I was young, stupid. I made mistakes. But I never stopped thinking about him." He paused. "I'd like to meet him, if you're willing." She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She just listened. That night, she sat on the edge of her bed, holding one of Ethan's baby pictures. How could someone walk away for 2 decades, and then come back with a phone call? But Ethan was an adult now, and he had the right to know, so she gave him the number, quietly, without pressure. His reaction surprised her. He didn't seem angry. He didn't ask questions. He just stared at the paper and said, "Thanks." No emotion, no hug, no "I'm not ready," just, "Thanks." A week passed. Then and then, Ethan showed up at her door. Not alone. Thomas was with him, a tall man, broad shoulders, gray around the temples. He smiled too warmly, his handshake too firm. His eyes scanned Rose's home like he didn't belong, and didn't care. Rose made tea, served cookies Ethan used to love. Neither of them touched the thing. Thomas spoke first. "I want to thank you for raising my son. I know it couldn't have been easy." Rose forced a smile. Ethan was never a burden. Thomas nodded slowly. "Still, I appreciate what you did back then." Back then, like it was over. Rose noticed how Ethan sat straighter next to Thomas, how he didn't look at her the same way, how he called Thomas Dad without flinching. It cut deeper than she expected as they stood to leave. Thomas placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You've grown into a fine man. I'm proud of you." Ethan smiled. Genuine, bright. The same smile he used to give Rose when she made pancakes shaped like stars. That smile wasn't hers anymore. After they left, Rose stood at the window for a long time. The tea had gone cold, the cookies untouched. She whispered to herself, "Who are you becoming, Ethan?" In the days that followed, Ethan became even more distant. He stopped returning her calls, stopped replying to messages. His social media now, full of pictures with Thomas. Fishing trips, barbecues, tailgating at football games. Rose stared at one photo. Ethan in a baseball cap, laughing. Thomas beside him, arm around his shoulder. The caption read, "Father and son." Finally, her throat tightened. She clicked away. And for the first time in years, she didn't send him a birthday card, but she did write one. She placed it in a drawer, beside the mystery letter, then closed it quietly. One day, her neighbor Margaret stopped by with rhubarb pie. The two women chatted, like old times, until Margaret asked, "So, is that Ethan's real father I saw last week? Tall fellow, slick car." Rose nodded slowly. Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Something about him. I don't know. Too polished, too quick to smile." Rose smiled sadly. "You noticed that too?" Margaret chuckled. "Well, I watch a lot of crime documentaries. Makes you suspicious of everyone." It was a joke, but Rose didn't laugh. because something in her gut said, Margaret might be right. Don't forget, if you want to keep following this story, hit subscribe so you can come back anytime. The next chapter only gets deeper, because Ethan's newfound father isn't just full of charm, he's full of secrets. The envelope was thin, just a slip of paper, really, no call, no knock at the door, no personal touch, just a name and an address on cheap cardstock. Rose stared at it for a long time. Ethan and Lily engagement dinner, Saturday at 6 p.m. That was it. No mom, no note, not even a "we hope you can come." She read it twice, then placed it on the counter, next to the salt. Funny how something so small could make your chest feel like it was caving in. Later that afternoon, Margaret dropped by with 2 coffees and a big smile. Guess what? I heard there's a party happening Saturday. Your boy's getting hitched. What are you gonna wear? Rose smiled politely, but her eyes gave her away. Margaret tilted her head. He didn't tell you himself, did he? Rose shook her head. No. I got an invitation. In the mailbox. Margaret's voice dropped. Oh, honey. Rose laughed weakly. It's fine. Maybe he was busy. Or thought I already knew. Busy doesn't stop love, Margaret said, setting down the coffee. And a real son doesn't let the postman deliver the news. That Saturday, Rose put on her best blue dress anyway. The one Ethan once said made her look like a sky before sunset. She curled her hair, wore her favorite earrings, then sat at her kitchen table, watching the clock. 6 p.m., 6:30, 7 o'clock. She never left. Something in her gut said, you're not welcome there. But the next morning, pictures began appearing online. Ethan and Lily, beaming. Thomas standing proudly beside them, glass raised. Lily's parents glowing with joy, and in the background dozens of guests, smiling, toasting. Not one of them was Rose. She zoomed in on one photo. The family shot. Ethan, Lily, Thomas, Lily's folks. Everyone looking like they belonged. Her stomach turned. She wasn't even asked to take the picture. She had simply vanished. She tried not to cry. She did laundry, fed the cat, swept the back steps. But when she bent to pick up a leaf, a quiet sob slipped out, and before she knew it, she was on the porch, on her knees, crying into her hands like a child. Margaret came over later with leftover meatloaf. One look at Rose's red eyes, and she set the plate down. He didn't even introduce you, did he? Rose whispered. I don't think anyone even knew who I was. They sat in silence. Margaret finally said, Want me to go egg his car? Rose let out a small laugh. The kind that breaks the crying. Tempting, because I will. I've still got aim. It was ridiculous. It was childish. It was exactly what Rose needed. They laughed for a full minute. Then Rose wiped her eyes and said, I raised him. I loved him. I was everything. And now, Margaret asked gently, now I'm nothing. A few days later, Ethan stopped by. No flowers, no explanation, just a plastic container of leftover cake. Hey, he said casually. Thought you might want some. Rose took it, nodding. I saw the photos, she said softly. Ethan scratched the back of his neck. Oh yeah, it was kind of chaotic. You know how Lily's mom is. Took over the whole thing. Rose said nothing. Ethan added, we'll do a proper family thing soon. Maybe just you and me. But Rose saw it, in his eyes. He didn't mean it. He was just softening the blow. She forced a smile. Of course, I'd love that. He stood in the doorway a moment longer, then left. Rose put the cake in the fridge, then sat at the table, hands folded in her lap. She whispered, when did I stop being family? The cake stayed untouched, and sometimes what hurts the most is being invisible to the one you gave your whole life to. The envelope had yellowed at the edges, tucked in the bottom drawer of Rose's dresser, beneath scarves, old birthday cards, and a baby sock she never had the heart to throw away. It was addressed to Ethan. In Rose's careful, looping script, but never sent. She had written it on his 18th birthday, and rewritten it a dozen times since. Each version more raw, more honest. But somehow, never enough. That evening, after Ethan left the leftover cake and excuses, Rose opened the drawer, pulled out the envelope, and stared at it for a long while. Then she took a breath, and began writing again. Dear Ethan, there's something I should have told you a long time ago. The next morning, Margaret found the letter in her mailbox, with a post-it note. Please deliver this. If anything happens. Margaret didn't ask. She just nodded to herself, and kept the note safe. 2 days later, Rose collapsed on her porch. Stress, fatigue, and a broken heart. The ambulance came. So did Ethan at the hospital. He sat in the waiting room, fidgeting, pacing, scrolling. His phone. He wasn't ready. He thought there'd be time. Margaret walked in quietly, sat beside him, then handed him the letter. "She wanted you to have this," she said. Ethan looked at it. His name, his mother's handwriting. His chest tightened. He opened it slowly. "Dear Ethan, I was just a girl when I had you. No ring, no family, no future. The man I loved disappeared the moment I said I was pregnant. I was scared, I was poor, and I was alone. But the second I heard your heartbeat, everything changed. You were mine, and I promised to protect you, even from the truth. Your grandparents said I'd ruin your life. They offered a deal. They'd raise you as theirs, put their name on your birth certificate, and I'd be the nanny, the family friend. I agreed, not because I didn't want to be your mother, but because I wanted you to have a chance. So I made your lunch every morning, read to you every night, sat front row at every school play. But I never got to hear you call me Mom. Still, you were my whole world. When they passed, I thought maybe E could finally tell you. But by then, you were grown. You had your own life, and I was just Rose. I never wanted to burden you, or make you question who you were. But Ethan, you are my son, by blood, by heart, by every scraped knee I kissed, every night I sat up when you were sick, every smile I memorized. I loved you enough to let you never know. But if you're reading this now, please remember me, not as the woman who stayed silent, but as the mother who stayed close, even from the shadows. Love always." Ethan stared at the paper. The words swam through his tears. Everything he thought he knew was a lie. All the times he pushed her aside, called her just a neighbor, left her out of moments that mattered. He had been turning his back on the only person who had never turned hers on him. He crumpled forward in the hospital chair, silent sobs shaking his shoulders, and just then, a nurse came out. "She's awake," she said softly. "She's asking for you." Ethan rose, the letter clenched in his hand, and walked toward the room where the truth waited. The church was stunning. Sunlight streamed through stained glass, painting the pews in blues and golds. Flowers lined the aisle. Guests chatted, laughed, checked their phones. The string quartet played softly in the background, but Ethan was somewhere else. He stood in the dressing room, staring into the mirror. His body sat loose, his eyes red from crying all night. In his pocket, the letter, folded, refolded, worn soft from being opened again and again. Knock, knock. A familiar voice peeked in. Margaret, in a bold pink hat no one else would dare wear to a wedding. "You look like a man headed to a funeral," she said, smiling gently. "Maybe I am," Ethan whispered. He held up the letter. "She's my mom." Margaret just nodded. "I know." Ethan sat down slowly. "I've lied to everyone. To myself. To her." "You didn't lie," Margaret said softly. "You just didn't know the truth until now." Outside, the music shifted. The bride was ready. Ethan took a deep breath, stood, adjusted his tie, and walked out. The ceremony began. The officiant smiled warmly. The guests turned, watching the bride walk in a vision in ivory, glowing with joy. Ethan stood at the altar, but he didn't smile. Not fully. His eyes scanned the rows of people. And then, he saw her. In the very back, Rose, in a simple blue dress, hair pulled back neatly, a small corsage pinned crooked on her chest. Their eyes met. He swallowed hard. The officiant spoke. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today," and Ethan raised his hand. "I'm sorry," he said. The music stopped. Whispers spread like wildfire. I can't do this," he said louder. "This whole thing, it's built on lies, and the one person who's loved me unconditionally is sitting in the back of this room, pretending she's no one." Gasps. Someone dropped their phone. "She is not a family friend. She is not just Rose. She is my mother." The bride turned pale. The audience froze. Ethan stepped off the altar, walked down the aisle, past stunned relatives, friends, co-workers. Ulrich rose, took her hand. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I should have known. I should have seen you." Tears rolled down her cheeks, and for the first time in his life, Ethan said, "Mom." A sound escaped her lips, half laugh, half sob. She covered her mouth, and just nodded. Back at the altar, the officiant cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, should we break for lunch?" Margaret stood and clapped. "Who's hungry?" Everyone laughed, just a little. because no one knew what else to do. Later, under a tree outside the church, Ethan and Rose sat on a bench. "You don't have to explain," she said. "I want to," he replied. And he did. He told her everything: the shame, the pressure, the confusion, the ache he'd always felt but never understood. They talked for hours, laughed, cried, and sat in comfortable silence. 2 weeks later, the church looked very different. No music, no guests, no altar, just sunlight streaming through the stained glass again, onto a quiet corner, where Ethan helped Rose onto a wooden bench. "I always thought churches were for people who had everything figured out," he said. Rose smiled, gently. "And now, I think they're for people who are still trying." She nodded. "Then we belong here." They sat in silence, the kind that only comes after storms. Not heavy, but honest. Ethan held her hand. No shame, no pretending, just love. Later that afternoon, they visited the old house, the one where Ethan had grown up but never truly understood. He walked room to room, touching doorknobs, walls, corners. Everything looked the same, and everything felt new. In the living room, Margaret sat with her knitting. She looked up. "Well, look who finally figured it out," she teased. Ethan grinned. "You knew all along, didn't you?" She smirked. "I may be old, but I'm not blind. You to share the same stubborn chin." They all laughed. Ethan's eyes landed on an old photograph tucked behind a clock. He picked it up. A blurry snapshot, a teenage Rose, cradling a baby, eyes wide with both terror and wonder. "That was the day she wouldn't stop crying," Margaret said, and Rose hummed the same lullaby for 5 hours straight. Ethan traced the edges of the photo. "Why'd no one tell me?" Margaret's smile faded. "Because life isn't always fair. And sometimes, people think silence protects more than truth ever could." As the sun began to set, Ethan drove Rose to the park, the same park where she used to take him when he was just the neighbor kid. They walked slowly, passing benches, swings, giggling children. At one point, a little girl fell on the gravel path, skinned her knee. Before Ethan could move, Rose had already knelt down. "Oh, honey," she said softly, pulling a tissue from her purse like magic. "You're okay. Let's fix this." The girl sniffled, looked up at her like she was a guardian angel. Ethan watched quietly, and his chest swelled with something new. Not guilt, not regret, but pride. That evening, as they stood near the fountain, Ethan pulled out his phone. "Can I take a picture of you?" Rose blinked. "Why?" "Because I missed 30 years of them. I want to start now." She laughed, shook her head, but smiled, and posed. He snapped the photo, looked at it, then handed her the phone. "Mom," he said, "save this one." Her hand trembled slightly as she took it. She stared at the image for a long while, then whispered, "Call me that again." He did. "Mom." And this time, the word didn't hurt. It healed. Weeks passed, then months. Ethan moved back to town, got a modest job at the library, started hosting Sunday dinners where Rose made too much food and Margaret always brought that horrible Jell-O salad no one liked but everyone praised. They laughed more, argued less, and slowly became a family. One day, Rose asked, "Do you regret walking away from the wedding?" Ethan thought for a moment, then smiled. "I didn't walk away. I walked toward the truth." As someone who spent years studying family dynamics and emotional trauma, what you've just witnessed is more than a dramatic story. It's a reflection of something painfully real. Millions of people grow up with missing pieces, secrets no one talks about, questions that get answered with silence, or worse, with lies. Ethan's journey wasn't just about discovering who his real mother was. It was about reclaiming identity, learning to choose love over legacy, truth over comfort. What struck me most was not the letter, or even the wedding interruption. It was that quiet moment in the park, when he called her mom not out of duty, but from the heart. That's when healing truly began. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever learned a family secret that changed everything? Or wished you had the courage to speak your truth, even when it hurt? Scroll down and share your story in the comments. This is a safe space, and your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this video moved you, don't let it be a one-time watch. Hit subscribe not just for us, but for yourself. So when life throws another twist your way, you'll have a place to come back to, a place that reminds you you're not alone, that if you're ready for another powerful story of truth, family, and second chances, I recommend the next video coming up right here. It's one you won't forget.